Hello there, everybody. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from the helm of the Philanthropy Mastermind series. And today's episode of How to Raise. So glad you could be here. Sorry for a little bit of a technical delay as we got started. Thank you very much for your patience. We have a good sized crowd here, and I'm going to invite you all to start saying hello right there in the chat so we know you are here. And the presenter, who I'm going to introduce to you in a moment, will also know you're here. Maybe if you'd start up the wheels turning by maybe letting us know which part of the country or perhaps the world you're from, which organization you're with, maybe even what you do. All of that would be a wonderful place to start. And thank you, Nick, for lighting that up, and Lou for joining Nick right there. It's great to see you, Bill and Nick and everybody, as we are getting underway today. If other people have trouble hearing, let us know. We will do our best to make corrections in that. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to what we're doing here today and then introduce our presenter for today's CFRE accredited program. But before I do any of that, I want to thank our sponsor, Evertrue Studios, a division of Evertrue, the global leader in donor engagement and fundraising intelligence, which helps nonprofits find, engage, and inspire their supporters. And many of you know that DonorSearch, which has been supporting this series for a decade, in the end of 2025 became a part of the Evertrue family of companies. And we're excited to continue and expand this series under Evertrue Studios. So my thanks once again to them. We won't be talking about Evertrue DonorSearch today. So if you're here for that purpose, do stick around. You'll see a QR code. You can capture that. You'll see some links in the chat. And of course, there's the website where there's also all the content from the series at donorsearch.net as well as at evertrue.com. All that will be available to you later. So with that, I want to jump into the content today, and with a quick reminder on a housekeeping front, which is that this is a live program. If you're watching this in the recorded form, that's not true for you, but for the rest of you, it's a live program. So please, once again, do join the folks in the chat and let us know that you're here. And also post questions at any time. We're going to reserve all those towards the end of the presentation and then give those to our presenter so that she can tackle them in turn. Now, today's session, of course, is on corporate philanthropy, and more specifically, how it's growing its share of charitable giving. And for many nonprofits, this is a particularly important moment to think about how businesses and corporations can become not just potential small sponsorship donors, but genuine philanthropic partners. Today's program is entitled Reaching Out to the Business Next Door, a relationship-driven approach to corporate philanthropy. And this session will take a practical relationship-first look at how corporate giving actually works. For that conversation, we have our presenter today, Sarah Miller, consultant with Palmetto Philanthropy. Sarah is a nonprofit executive with deep experience leading organizations in both paid and volunteer roles, and she currently serves as the president of the Association of Fundraising Professionals DC chapter, one of the biggest in the country, and most recently was executive director of a national oral health care foundation before moving into her consulting role. For more than a decade, she's partnered with a wide variety of nonprofits and public service organizations focusing on strategic planning, fundraising, program development, and capacity building, particularly for small and mid-sized organizations, as I'm sure there are many of you here in the crowd today. She brings a practical understanding of how organizations grow and how relationships drive that growth. Please join me in welcoming Sarah to the How to Raise stage. Sarah?
Hi, Jay. Nice to see you again. And hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to talk about one of my favorite forms of philanthropy, which is corporate giving, corporate philanthropy. So thank you all. Like Jay said, if you'll throw some questions in the chat, we'll tackle them at the very end. And I'm going to share with a very basic PowerPoint presentation, so that way I'm not reading from some slides. Oh, Gigi, I see we have some AFP DC board members here. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to share my screen now. All right. I want to start out again by saying thank you. And this is very much a relationship-driven approach to corporate philanthropy. When I was thinking of the title, I thought, reaching out to the business next door. This came from a conversation I had with a client who asked about, well, how can we start with, talking to companies and we don't even know how to approach them. And my question was, well, your board members work for companies, don't they? And we all shared a good laugh because yes. And so they actually had some businesses. And when we looked at who they were partnering with stuff, they also had other business partnerships that they were able to leverage. So I that's why I say reaching out to the business next door, because taking a relationship approach is hands down always going to be your best approach. So today's agenda, hellos, quick introductions since Jay did such a phenomenal job. Then I'm going to set the stage with some quick stats, talk about how corporate philanthropy works in practice. You might see my dog in the back, versus, what we all might see in the textbooks. The just rapidly changing landscape and what that means for the way we can approach the ask and how we look at incorporating this into our fundraising programs. And then, of course, the practical, let's start building these relationships. And then after that, just a little touch on what might the case for support look like, specifically for this type of philanthropy with the different motivations for their giving. So some quick stats. I think, when you look at the philanthropy landscape, we keep seeing the same thing of fewer individual donors giving, but an increasing number of money being given by those fewer donors, right? So, and then you also see kind of the landscape of where it might be shifting. Well, if you look at the past few years of corporate philanthropy, you'll see that the slice of the charitable, the corporate giving, like slice of the pie, continues to grow and grow and grow. And this is one thing that it's not just continuing to grow, but it's also continuing to grow as an opportunity with just a large number of prospects. And so it's kind of a really unmet, there's just an insane amount of opportunity here for nonprofits to be able to come in, build some relationships, and really make um, a meaningful approach to their uh, philanthropic strategy overall. But it works a little differently. So, in the textbooks, sorry, I don't know why he's freaking out. In the textbooks, you have cash donations, corporate foundations, matching gifts, tons of platforms for this. You have volunteer grants. The biggest one you might see is event sponsorships. That probably, when you think about corporate philanthropy, you think about it from your event sponsorship view. Or, in-kind donations, pro bono. But in real life, it's a lot more nuanced than that. So decision makers actually vary by company size, type, industry, sometimes structure, and their long-term goals. And it doesn't always have to be an event sponsorship. Sponsorships usually live in a marketing budget line, but there are all these other budgets from the same one company, especially if they're mid to large companies, for other types of dollars, or you could get an event sponsorship for one, and then the charitable giving through their charitable strategies on top of that. And so because of that, and because, we're all fundraisers here, it's all based on relationships. When I took a corporate philanthropy class years ago, I think through AFPDC maybe, one of the things they said, you've got to have like someone on the inside, right? Because the relationship is going to, someone who's in there advocating for you is not only going to give you insight to a lot of how this works, but they're also going to be your ultimate champion. And there's also a difference then between small businesses and the larger businesses, and how those relationships might be different. So with a smaller business, you have a better chance of getting straight to a decision maker or someone directly adjacent to the decision maker. With larger businesses, it's probably going to take a longer time. It's going to be maybe a more formal path to getting your ask in front of a decision maker. And then small businesses also usually are going to be giving for personal, community, and relational reasons because they know someone on your board, they sit on your board. And sometimes larger businesses who have maybe multiple offices in different regions or different cities, that regional office is going to take a similar approach because they want to be shown very visible and as a local part of that community. And then, yeah, your existing donors and volunteers who work at corporations are your warmest entry point. So I like to say that this is similar to the way you want to approach foundations, right? You could do the applications. A lot of bigger companies are moving to more online application based. Um, but putting in a cold application is not going to be as effective as having someone you can reach out to and say, hey, I think we're a fit. I want to talk about it. And can you help me get in front of the right person to talk about it? That being said, there's a massive shifting landscape. Um, I mean, in the past 3 years, we've seen a shift. I think that's far outpaced the past decade, and some of that has been, DEI and CSR reframing, the way private equity, their share of ownership continues to increase. Very, very new tax law that I think a few of us have seen, maybe more than a few of us, if you've been on LinkedIn, have seen people talking about several articles about M&A, which is mergers and acquisition. That activity is surging. So as that's happening, certain industries, the amount of companies, they're shrinking or they look very different. And small business giving is growing. And with this shifting landscape, that's going to, of course, affect the way that you research, the way you approach, and ultimately the different motivations behind these different companies giving. So then, okay, if that's the case, how do we build the prospect pipeline? How do we make our in? And some of it might be simpler than what you assume. You start with your board. You can do some stakeholder mapping, look at what kind of connections your board and other key stakeholders or volunteers have, and see if they'll leverage those and, not just within their own companies or colleagues at different companies. The board and volunteers are going to be hands down your number one best avenue for getting started with incorporating companies into your donor pipeline. Stakeholder mapping can take that and just spread that out. So just a quick basic on stakeholder mapping. Map out who your key stakeholders are, volunteers, boards, key donors, your partners, and research to see anyone they might have connections to, whether it's on a different board, whether it's on a different, if they've worked for a different company for several years, or if they have part ownership in a company. So that also gives you a bit of a landscape of maybe a network you're not tapping into that exists. The other thing is there are matching gift tools or programs that some of them you can put your individual donor list, you can compare them to see where they're at. And if you have a truly dedicated donor who has raised their hand to help out and they're so passionate about your mission, when they say, hey, what else can I do? Tap on them to make an introduction and see if they can't help you establish a relationship with a company, with their company, or, again, an adjacent company. The other thing, research, research, research. So, and after that, timing is everything. And the I think we all know there are tools for like researching foundations in the 990s and the more charitable giving. You can do that for corporate foundations as well. And so if you look at you're using your tool to look at that, you can see if there's a company based on, research. Do they have a high presence and a lot of employees in your region and where you serve people? Take that company, look to see if they have a foundation, then look up the foundation's 990s, look up any press release from that company in the past 2, 3 years that a lot of times they'll put these press releases out on where they're giving their partnerships. They're trying to get in front of everybody. But the other side of that, you can also use other research tools um, because timing is everything. When a company is getting ready to sell, say it's a smaller company getting ready to sell to a bigger company, then oftentimes the owner of that smaller company is looking to donate or has the resources to donate. And it, of course, helps long term with some of the tax liability. And so there are business research, and I have an info sheet where I'm going to share these resources and I'll provide Jay with um, to share to everyone. But you can look to see the history. It's public information on the company moves and some of this research that helps inform capacity and timing as well. And I want to spend now a good amount of time here because I think that with this, the changing landscape, and then the way the motivation is different for companies, reframing the case becomes extremely important. So the corporate giving is never going to be truly altruistic. We might love it to be, it's not going to be. There's that at the end of the day, what does the company receive, right? There's a different motivation. We as nonprofits and nonprofit professionals are responsible to our stakeholders, which they're the communities we serve and the causes we work every day for. A business, they're responsible to their stakeholders, which are their shareholders. And so they are, as much as we'd love for altruism to be the reigning theme, it's not the case because they have a job to do in making sure that they have, those profits and that ROI because they're accountable to those shareholders and their customers at the end of the day. So what does the company receive? Now that can look differently depending on the company. So and depending on the budget line. So I want to go back to this because in real life, when you look at the what does the company receive, the size and type and the budget line and the relationship you have is going to determine that. A great example of this is I had, right? So 2 different donors. One was a family company, very passionate about the cause, long-term existing relationship with even the founding of the foundation I worked for. And because they were still privately owned, the global company, but as far as the way the leadership structure and how close and personal they were with everyone, it was much easier to actually have those relationships with decision makers. And because they had their own foundation and the company, I was able to get a donation and do partner programs with the foundation and have a relationship there. But I was also able to leverage my relationship with the company to be able to do They had, we had one program where it was sponsored for an event, a multi-year corporate pledge, and also a very specific service for a very specific scholarship program where proceeds from a certain, I think, set of product lines, the a percentage came to this scholarship program. And because they really, really cared and helped establish that, and because it looks good for companies to be able to say they're giving back to the community. There's just endless amounts of research and survey work done out there where consumers have said over and over again that they prefer to give to companies who they perceive to be giving back or doing good. You know, of course, that doing good is going to be different person to person, but companies are trying to capture that and be very visibly part of the doing good. And so then on the other side, a much, much more complicated um, public company where I had to go through a board member. We developed materials. We had to talk about, you know, the amount of people their logo was going to get in front of, the kind of recognition at different events, how the giving would reflect kind of in their own environment for the type of products that they put out. So our dental practitioner is going to be seeing this, the ones who use our products. We developed all these materials to get in front of them. And then they had to, my contact on the inside had to take it up the chain versus me going straight to the owner of the company. And so because I had that champion, I was able to know exactly what had worked in the past for asking for corporate gifts and what hadn't to be able to help craft those materials. And then when they eventually moved and sold, you know, and went into private equity, it was a negative impact because when companies are looking to sell, especially in the private equity world, they downsize and they want to reduce the amount they're spending and anything perceived as waste. So they get a lot nitpickier about where they're spending that money. And so then we lost, you know, our ability to as easily ask for money, and our key advocate wasn't able to then get to the decision maker. But then once it had sold, we were able to try to reestablish that relationship. And then I also want to touch on when you see the larger businesses doing a version of the regional, and that's also a different motivation. You're looking at someone who wants to show their employees that even though they might be national or global in scale, that they care locally about where the employee lives and works and has family and friends. And so that motivation to larger motivation to retain, you know, their talent. So they're going to look more locally and really lean on their employees for helping them decide where and what to get. And this is why the easier route for a lot of companies is to establish, you know, match giving programs. This is where HR, having the connection with an HR representative in these companies is so important because you want to make it as easy as possible to be a good partner and set it up in a way to where they don't have to do anything. You're there, you're connected, and they can have their employees donate, feel good, they look good, and it's connected to the community they're in. And then I want to go back to kind of timing is everything. Because this brand alignment and visibility, it's really going to matter for different companies at different times, right? A company might be about to launch a new initiative or try to get into a new market. And so they're going to want to be visible and to, you know, really show up maybe in that area or in front of consumers in that market. Another thing where brand alignment and visibility might, you know, it's a funnier one. If a company needs to kind of, you know, make up some goodwill with the public, then they are also more likely to engage in philanthropic activities, as that can help tremendously with showing, and getting back into the good graces in the public eye. The other thing that not just consumers for brand alignment and visibility, and the timing, but this can also be for other business relationships. So this is where the research comes in hand, because if you want, say, like B2B, right? Business to business, that is on a lot of people's minds. And so if you have an in with, say, like certain corporate industries where there's a manufacturer and distributor relationship, distributors are want to get in front of, they're going to want to get in front of these manufacturers to show like, hey, we're a great fit for you. And manufacturers are more likely to go with an organization that a big distributor might already have a relationship, because they want to show that they are also a good partner. So even just looking at the structure there, or a starting out new business, right? They want to show the people in their community that they're there for the long haul. And more than likely, if they're out there in the community and visibly doing good with the community, they're going to be building those customer relationships. So you want to come up and be a good partner there. And then the other side of that is because employment engagement opportunities are really, really big. The employee match programs, those are just, we're seeing them pop up everywhere. There are some companies that you can just enroll in their then the employees can pick and choose. One of my favorite, Giving Tuesday is tough, but one of my favorite ways to leverage Giving Tuesday is to make it a matched giving program. So well in advance, partner with a company, again, someone probably who's on your board or a donor who gives individually. Give them all the materials. This is why, and then you repurpose your individual giving materials. You give them all the materials to put in front of their employees, and then you just request that they match it up to a certain point. And instead of having to focus on, you having to focus on that wide spread of visibility against every other nonprofit on earth, you're able to focus in then on an existing relationship and be a giving partner there for that company. The other thing is volunteering. Having volunteer opportunities, approaching HR, or like the CSR corporate social responsibility or impact member of the team. If you're able to give them, and you're structured in a way to have like volunteer days or parts of your efforts that include volunteers, even if it might not get you a donation right off the bat, that is a really nice way to start building that relationship. And so then with that employee engagement opportunity, it's reframing it as, we are a partner to you, and we can all do some good together. The measurable social impact data. I think you don't have to go like government grant reporting when it comes to data, but it is important to show how many people are you serving. This is a great chance to work with your program colleagues. If you are, if you have multiple departments, so you can pull email, social media links to see the visibility, but also the amount of people. And especially framing it, if it's a company looking to, their motivation is to be visible in the community, framing it to just show off how many people in that community and how many lives in that community that you already touch. And customizing it, of course, then to kind of match what you're seeing on the research and what you're hearing from people in the community. For the larger companies, they want to see, they do want to see some mass quantity, or they want to see sort of sustainability and scalability. So any kind of stats you can provide on on, proof of concept or showing that, hey, here's a history, a very condensed history of our programs and how an investment of X dollars, impacts so many X lives. And then if you're the type of nonprofit that then is connected to social services or community services, you can then show like a reduction on the burden, fewer people in an ER equals fewer tax dollars being paid into, having to be spent on the healthcare system. Um, so you want to look at that measurable social impact data. The customized tiered partnership packages, we all love a good brochure, right? A good menu. Lean in the relationship first, have a conversation. Don't be so rigid that you're not really selling a product, you're selling an opportunity for someone to become a part of your team. And so have different options, don't chase the dollars and sell something you can't follow through on, but make it flexible. Really look at customizing it to be a good fit that benefits you and is going to clearly benefit them in a way that they can report back to either, in a press release or their own employees, or that they can just see in terms of building a relationship with the community or their customers. And then also customized for their structure. And a lot of what I just went through is very much like the customizing for the structure, right? So I would put your prospects on a spreadsheet. And then that way you can or hopefully CRM, but have something where you're capturing what kind of structure they are and maybe a couple of notes on what that motivation might be. And to get that, first start with mapping out who and where you have existing relationships. But then if you don't have an existing relationship, but you're like, this company has so many employees and does so much in this community that they really should be, supporting us, then reach out and email for an intro call, because you're going to first and foremost need to get this information and get it straight from the source. So that way you can customize something that's going to be an easier path to a yes or a conversation to a yes. Corporate giving can sometimes take, especially more complicated structures, can take longer. And you sometimes will only get one chance to really get something in front of a decision maker. And so you want to make sure whatever you have that gets in front of that decision maker is going to be as customized and as airtight as possible. Because also, if you have an advocate who's doing that for you, it's also a representation of them and, their own connections and the way they interact with nonprofits. So that's a lot. And I just want to come back and say, like, at the end of the day, ultimately, building the relationships, using a lot of the same tools you're already using, reaching out, using board members, leveraging existing relationships, looking up 990s, using maybe different, the same websites companies use during mergers and acquisitions for due diligence, where it tells all the public information about that company. Use those sites to do your own due diligence, but make it about the people behind that company logo, because you're actually building a relationship and you're all coming together for the same cause. And now I want to open it up for any questions.
So first of all, thank you very much for that, Sarah. And I also want to do a quick audio check here, make sure folks can hear me. I know I was a little quiet before, so I'm sure Jack will let me know if I'm audible at this point. But thank you very much for the presentation. Before we begin with the questions, let's share some of your contact information so people can get in touch with you afterwards. Would you mind letting us know?
Yeah, I'm dropping it right now in the chat.
Great, great. And we'll also make sure to get that audibly if that's okay for those who watch the recording later. And let me see. I know we have a number of questions. And before we jump into all of them, I do want to give a quick preview about some of the stuff that's coming up ahead. And that's, first of all, on the housekeeping front, you're going to see a little survey at the end today. That's both to let us know how you felt about Sarah's great presentation today, but also what you want to see and hear in the weeks and months ahead. We do these programs every other week for this, and then alternating with our Front Lines of Social Good show on, again, alternating Wednesdays. So if you would please fill that out and let us know what you would like to see in this series. It really helps us to make sure it's tailored to your needs and interests. Additionally, you're going to see coming to you in the next couple of days a link to the recording. So that'll be important for you to keep a lookout for. If you don't see it, look in your spam folder. And Sarah, I know people are asking about your slides. Is this something you're willing to share?
Yes, of course. I'll do that. And then I have an info sheet with some of the resources for the research, and then a deeper dive on some of these structures and how they're different. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if you would like, we can also include that, a link to that within the follow-up email. So both of you can see how to reach out to her right there. You can see it right there in the chat, but also be on the lookout for that email. And then lastly, I just want to let you all know what's coming up in the series very quickly while you're adding your additional questions either to the chat or to the Q&A. First of all, this Friday on the PM podcast, which is our audio show, I'll be joined by Ray Saldana, President and CEO of Communities and Schools. It's really, really moving conversation about his journey from a person who was in the community and school movement as a student up through leading the organization today, and also the conversation with my friend Karen Isbell is our current episode. She's the Vice President for College Advancement at Kalamazoo College and Chair of the Board of Directors at the Kalamazoo Symphony Orchestra. Great conversation about her trajectory, her journey. And then next Wednesday, of course, again, we have the Front Lines of Social Good show, where we always have people who are talking to the top issues of the day, so you can join us 1 p.m. next week. Now let's turn around finally to your questions. And I know in addition to people just asking about the slide decks, we had a number of different things that popped up. So maybe you can see those, but I do see one right here, which was asking about where you do your research to do your stakeholder mapping. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, so this is another thing that it's kind of, I do have one tool that I have used that then puts it in a visual way, but I've also used just manually put together a chart. This is looking at, so your board members, you should be getting some bio information from them. If not, of course, reaching out, doing that. And then when you get, who they're connected with, what they're connected with, then do your research there as well. A great place is other boards, past companies they've worked at. And then also, if they have posted anything on LinkedIn, LinkedIn is a great research tool. So if they've posted anything on LinkedIn or shared or talked about how they partner or volunteer, you can add that to their map. And then from there, and you just, actual mapping, you can then go from there. What I like to do too is it's interesting when you look at the reason why people might volunteer, right? So when you start cross mapping, like where people are connected, then you can also see some recurring themes. I did one stakeholder mapping for a library, and it come to find out, like, because of the community they were in, they had a lot of people within education and within military nonprofits. And so then able to identify that and see that, potentially some of the those who fund in that space, they also had a program for veterans. So then going to one of the board members and saying, hey, notice you have this, we have a program that fits, and then they did indeed have a connection to a foundation. So it's just, you can map it however you want, but just using publicly information that's out there. Of course, they have specific tools, platforms, You can use your search engine. It takes a while if you're using AI. I think AI hands down researching using AI is one of the most underrated uses of it. But you can also give a list, give parameters, have it provide the resources of where they're finding this information. But that would also help capture sometimes those press releases you might not be seeing.
Thank you for that. And there was a great side conversation during your presentation about how people are handling budget timelines, and,
Yeah.
and I guess specifically looking at the timelines of the different entities they were exploring. So is that another use case for AI, which is a little more specific, so that people aren't just thinking who's a possible prospect, but when is the right time to talk to them?
Yeah, and so the budget timeline, seeing what their specific budget is. The other thing is some companies end of year, there is a good opportunity. I would see when they're fiscal, if their calendar fiscal, get that information, but also end of year when they're trying to reduce tax liability or, trying to offload some of their budget. Sometimes that is a great opportunity to then come in and be like, hey, we can help you do that. And then the other thing with looking at the changing landscape where private equity and mergers and acquisitions takes on a much larger share of the corporate
Mhm.
landscape, the using, and there's very specific, I have the names of some of them I can give out from the list, but there's like the SEC, EDGAR, EDGAR, that that provides access to like quarterly and annual reports, audited financials. There's another site that's like open corporates, different Secretary of State websites. Um, and then the Chamber of Commerce website sometimes will have, but keeping an eye on companies and their specific websites for this too that are in the process of selling, have just sold,
Right.
because if they're in that process, if they're just probably not going to engage. They're not looking to make a lot of changes during that period of time.
That's such an important consideration, and it's true whether they're for profit or not for profit, excuse me, public or private. And in fact, that goes to the heart of something that Dan had mentioned earlier in the chat about that distinction between publicly traded companies, which you'd find on Edgar, versus the private companies, which also have their own things going on, especially among the owners, the small group of partners, the presidents of companies like that. Do you have any other thoughts or anything you'd like to say about that distinction, and maybe how you think about it when you think about the opportunities in those sectors, about how you identify the right prospects, but also how to think about how to communicate with them, given that the ownership structure is so vastly different?
Yeah, so that's going to be a timing difference. And then it's going to also be a different approach to the relationship. So um, because I mean, private owners don't have this like complicated structure, this big, board that they're also having to like report to, shareholder meetings that are just like, I've seen a new CEO or president like come in and then get fired pretty quickly just because of a few board members that were like, well, you're not doing this X impossible goal. So I mean, they in you can see this in some of the like, I think Bloomberg and a few other news sites that kind of keep an eye on some of that stuff. But the board, kind of similar to us in these like publicly held companies are a lot more influential. Privately held companies, private owners, small businesses, entrepreneurial businesses, um, the you have a higher chance of actually having or getting a relationship with key decision makers, and they're going to be a little bit more flexible because they don't have bosses on bosses on bosses, and they don't have, what's the term, the multiple chefs in the kitchen, right? There's not as many people trying to
Sure.
make decisions.
True. And just a personal observation, which is that uh, the for-profit, and why do I keep saying for-profit? The corporate entities that would be covered under Edgar, that are SEC filers, they would be, to a degree, they would have a more transparency than with the privates. And what's interesting to me about that is that while I completely agree that if you are a private company owner, if you really are the owner, you own more than 51%, you can do pretty much whatever you want. It doesn't mean you will, but you can. And there are timing issues for them, and you alluded to that. There might be a time when they're thinking about transitioning that company, and there might be some kinds of things that you look for when you're thinking about when might they be thinking about that kind of transition. But sometimes it's kind of hard to get that information. So when you think about that, when you think about what are the times when private business owners might be more interested in hearing from people about these kinds of philanthropic considerations, are there any kind of clues that you look for?
Yeah, I think a past history of giving, especially if it's a family company, and looking up not just the way that the company has given, but seeing if it's, multi-generational, what has if there's a common theme for the across generations in giving, because a lot of times they do try to stay like true within a certain set of values. Especially when it comes to giving. The other thing I would look for is if they are like if it's more regional, I think being able to prove that you are a good partner in that region. If you can also find sometimes there are multiple owners, right? So if, yeah, one owner is getting ready to sell or might be making some moves right after they make the sell, then, or them personally. This is an instance where corporate giving and individual giving, like major gift giving, can go hand in hand, because if you have a relationship, someone's retiring and looking to sell, maybe part of their ownership or just in general, that time is great then to reach out and be like, hey, I know you're about to sell. We'd love to talk about what your plans are, um, you know, after the sell. And then you could just use and go through your typical process for individual giving. The other thing I think is, if they're another good flag is if they are trying to launch a new product or initiative, and you might know this if you have a relationship, or if they're like, you can find any kind of R&D work they've done in the past that might be leading up to something, or research, or if they have a case study or they're presenting at some of their conferences, they're going to want to get as much visibility as possible. And if you're a good, marketing partner, then their logo, their brand is going to get in front of people in your network as well. And so it helps them get a higher reach.
So if you were to try and take all this information, all you're thinking about this topic, and roll it into one thing, what would be the biggest takeaway from what you've shared today?
See where board members and volunteers work at. See their comfort level about reaching out to these companies. And I think that's kind of twofold, but also do your research. Get a little curious. Make it, like, what kind of information is going to give you, make a stronger partnership. That way, when you approach that, you and the board member, or you approach that board member, you're like, hey, this person is a good fit. I know it. And here are the reasons why. Then it's a stronger case, and it's again about building the relationship, not just trying to get quick dollars.
Wow. Yeah, that's music to my ears. Thank you so much for all this, Sarah. Really do appreciate it. And once again, everybody, be on the lookout for an email with a link to the recording, as well as thank you again, Sarah, for the slides. We'll look forward to getting those and then shipping those out to everybody. Please also make sure that these emails from us are not going into your spam filter so you don't miss any announcements about the future programs. And don't forget to fill out that survey. We really do appreciate it. My thanks to all of you for joining us and for the work you do every day to advance this field. And I want to thank our producer, Jack Frost, who makes these weekly programs run so smoothly despite technical hurdles it would be difficult to convey or to imagine. And of course, to our sponsor, Evertrue Studios, a division of Evertrue, for their continued support of this series, now going on 11 years. Can you believe that? We'll look forward to seeing you next Wednesday for another live episode of Frontlines of Social Good, and 2 Wednesdays from now of this series right here. Until then, take care, everybody. We'll see you soon.